Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I am very excited for today's episode. This is all about wines for Thanksgiving. And I don't know about you, but Thanksgiving is just the perfect opportunity to try some really delicious wines, right? You get all your family, your friends around a table. Everybody's cooked this delicious food. It's a perfect time to bring out some delicious wines. But where do you start? That's what I'm here to help you with. So I'm going to share 5 wines that I think are absolutely perfect for Thanksgiving. And who knows, I might share a couple more if it's hard for me to hold back. But before we get into it, I just want to do a quick reminder. If you are not on my mailing list yet, I would love for you to join. When you join, you will get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. You can head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recs, special offers, all that good stuff. It's great to be following along. And be sure to check out my virtual tasting club, The Cork Crew. We get together every month to try new wines and learn from others in the wine world. Head to my website, corkandfizz.com/thecorkcrew, and use code WINE101 when you sign up to get your first month free. Now, without further ado, let's get into the episode. All right. No celebration starts without a toast. So for Thanksgiving, I recommend having a sparkling wine. Now you can go for champagne. You go for it. Go baller. Grab yourself some champagne. But if you're interested on maybe having some champagne on a beer budget, keep listening. My favorite sparkling wine to serve pretty much for any occasion is Cremant. And basically what Cremant is it's a sparkling wine made in France, made in the same style as champagne, but in different regions throughout France. So here's the thing. Champagne, technically, I know there's so many jokes about this, but it is true. Champagne can only be called champagne if it comes from the Champagne region in France, all right? If you make a wine in the same way that champagne is made, with the same grape varieties, but you do it outside of Champagne, you can no longer call it champagne. So many of the regions around France, which make really delicious sparkling wine, came up with Cremant. And so these Cremants are made in that same method, potentially same grapes, sometimes different grapes, but they're made in different regions like Jura, Burgundy, Loire Valley, Bordeaux. Almost all of the main regions have one. Now let's talk a little bit about what is so special about this champagne method. And are all sparkling wines made with that method? So the second part of that question I can answer quickly. Not all sparkling wine is made in what's called the champagne or traditional method. So to explain how the sparkling wine is made, let's just go back first to how regular wine is made. Wine is made using a process called fermentation. And this is where you have grape juice, which has sugar in it. You add yeast, so you have sugar plus yeast. That yeast eats the sugar and turns it into alcohol and carbon dioxide. All right, when you're making a still wine, aka no bubbles, no sparkling, you're going to do that fermentation process, and the carbon dioxide that's created is just going to be left off into the air. We don't care about it. Now, I'm sure this gives you a little hint as to how sparkling wine is made. With sparkling wine, we care about that carbon dioxide that is created. However, here's the thing. Most sparkling wines, and any sparkling wine made in the champagne method, goes through that fermentation process twice. So that means you're going to make wine, just a regular still wine first to do the fermentation process. We don't care about the carbon dioxide. We have our wine. Now you're going to take that wine, you're going to add more sugar and you're going to add more yeast, and it's going to go through a second fermentation. Now, to make it the champagne or traditional style, you're going to do that inside the bottle. So inside the bottle that you buy, they're going to put the wine that they've made. They're going to add sugar and they're going to add yeast. Then they're going to put a crown cap on it, like the caps that you see on like a beer bottle. Put that on it. And they're going to let that second fermentation happen inside the bottle. So cool. It's going to trap the carbon dioxide in there. That's how we get the bubbles. But the thing is that it also traps all of the dead yeast, which if you've heard me say in previous episodes, those are called lees, L-E-E-S. Now, there's nothing wrong with those. Well, they make your wine pretty cloudy, and they can, typically you want your sparkling wine to be very bright, exuberant, right? And this might cloud that up a little bit. So they found a way to get rid of that. So what they do is they slowly tip the wine. So after it's finished its second fermentation, all we have is the dead yeast, any of that gunk we want out. They're going to slowly tip the bottle, like basically almost upside down. So now all of the yeast and all of those particles have gone to the neck of the bottle, the very top of it. Then what they're going to do is they're going to freeze the top of the bottle. And what that does is it basically creates like an ice chunk that contains all of the sediment and all of the lees. Then they're going to do a process called disgorgement. And this is where they quickly open the wine bottle. The carbon dioxide and the pressure inside the bottle shoots that little chunk of ice out of the bottle. They're going to quickly put their hand back over it, put a little bit of they're going to do a process called dosage. So it adds usually like a sugar wine mixture back into the bottle so it fills it back up. And then they're going to put the cork in it. And that is how you make champagne. That is the traditional method. So that is also how you make Cremant. And like I said, the Cremant is made in multiple regions throughout France. One of my favorites, Cremant de Bourgogne, is a great champagne alternative because for one, they use the same grapes as champagne. So they use Pinot Noir and they use Chardonnay. They're also quite close to Champagne, the region. They're only a small distance south from Champagne. So you're going to have a similar grape growing region. Another favorite of mine is Cremant de Loire. And so if you remember from the France episode, Loire Valley, that's located in Western France. I know I'm like trying to picture a map of France in my head, make sure I get my East and West right here. But the Cremant can be made out of, these are going to be different grapes. They're going to be made out of Chenin Blanc, Cabernet Franc, and or Pinot Noir. So any combination of those. These again, so delicious. And lastly, if you can find it, it's a little harder to find, but I think it's worth searching for, Cremant de Jura. And this is Jura, Jura. And this region is right next to Burgundy, so just east of Burgundy. It's a very small, tiny little region. They make really unique wines. One of my favorite wines that they make is called Sauvignon, though it looks like Savagnin. It is not like a mispronunciation, or it's not like a misspelling of Sauvignon Blanc. Totally different grape. Ends up being kind of funky and rich and just different, and I love that about it. But Cremant de Jura is often made actually with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Again, same grapes that they use in Champagne. But then with a little addition of some other grapes, they can use Pulsard, that Sauvignon, which I typically say Savagnin just because it like looks more like that, and Pinot Gris and Trousseau. And so again, just slightly unique, but look for these bottles. You can typically find a Cremant for under $30, which I think is a pretty good deal for a French sparkling wine. All right, so that's wine number one for your Thanksgiving table, or, just to toast. Cheers. It's going to be great before dinner if you want something to drink while you're cooking. But honestly, sparkling wine pairs so well with food. Give it a try with your meal too. You might as well. All right, moving on to the wines I'd recommend you have on your table. Now, there are so many to choose from, and I wanted to make sure we had some variety. So I'm going to recommend a rosé, a red wine, and a white wine. Okay, but at the end, I'll share some other ones that I might could put on the table as well, since just like 3 wines is so hard to narrow it down to. So my first recommendation is going to be a rosé that is made from some version of what the wine world calls the GSM blend. This GSM stands for Grenache, Syrah, and Mourvèdre or Mourvèdre. And I say some combination because I think you could do a wine that is made from all three of those grapes, like a rosé that's a blend of all three, or you could get like a rosé that's one or two of those, and I still think it would work really, really well. So first, talking about that blend. The blend is really famous and it works so well because each grape brings something a little different. So first you have the Grenache. It brings in this nice bright red fruit. The Syrah has an earthiness, a smokiness, and then the Mourvèdre is just full-bodied, lots of really, richness and some black pepper, some spice in there. And so when you combine those three together, you get the best of all three of those worlds. Now, like I said, it doesn't have to be a combination of all three, and you can even throw in a couple other ones too. It doesn't have to be only those three, but keep an eye out for those varietals. And I say those in particular. Now, lots of other rosés could work really, really well. To be honest, rosé is a great food-friendly option. I think a lot of people, when they think of a celebration and they're going to bring wine, they need to bring like these big, powerful red wines. And while you are welcome to do that, think about the food that's on the table. My typical traditional Thanksgiving dinner includes turkey, stuffing, green bean salad, or green bean casserole, I should say. Oh, man, I embarrassed all the Midwesterners out there. I'm sorry. That was green bean casserole. I'm trying to think what else. Mashed potatoes, gravy, maybe some sweet potatoes, right? None of these things are like overly powerful, right? There's no steak on the table, though. If you have steak at your Thanksgiving, pull me up a seat. I'll join you. Or anything, they're very herbal. You use a lot of herbs, whenever I think of Thanksgiving, I think of like thyme and rosemary and all this delicious flavor. And stuffing can be very vegetal with the mushrooms and earthy. But a big, bold red could overpower it. So this way, we're kind of bringing in some of the flavors of our big reds, like a Syrah and a Mourvèdre, but by doing it in a rosé form, which again, rosé is made with red grapes, but with less skin contact, so it's almost made like a white wine, it can be a little more delicate. So it's not overpowering, but it still has some of that spiciness, like, the black pepper or the earthiness, that a Syrah or Mourvèdre would bring on its own as a red wine. So what should you look for if you're looking for a GSM rosé? Great question. First, you can look for anything from Provence, Provence. I sure hope I spelled that right in my notes. And now for this one, there are so many Provence rosés out there. So this one I might recommend looking for something above $15. Now, there are a couple options that you could find for less, and the ones that I've tried that I would recommend. There's one called Côte des Roses. It's in that like really fancy glass bottle, and it's got like a glass stopper. If you've ever seen it, it's a beautiful bottle. Usually I don't tell people to go for like pretty bottles. I'm like, that's marketing. But this one's actually very good. So give that a try. Also the La Vie Ferme. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. It looks like La Ville Ferme. It has like a rooster on the label if you've ever seen it. That's also a good budget-friendly option. I've had that many times before. Especially if you're like feeding a crowd and it's a bunch of people who like are just drinking wine to drink wine. Those are good options. Now, if you're looking for something a little fancier maybe, or a little higher end, some options, these are more going to be single varietal, and they're going to be from areas here in the US just because I'm most familiar with these wineries. So one, Dossier, if you remember, we did an episode with them and I got to try their rosé of Syrah. And I think Sydney was mentioning this was actually a top seller right around Thanksgiving because it was great to have on the table. And I couldn't agree more. I think this would work really, really well. It's that perfect balance between, powerful flavors, but not overwhelming. Another great rosé, which this one might be cheating a little bit, but it's one of my absolute ultimate favorite rosés in the world. So I had to throw it in. It's from a winery called a Mathiasen in Napa Valley. And it's a blend of lots of different grapes, but the dominant one is Grenache. So I think it still kind of counts for this. Another good option is Final Girl. We've had their winemaker, Anna, on here before. They make a pet nat rosé of Syrah. So this is actually kind of a combination of the bubbles and the rosé option. So again, going to be very food friendly. Anytime you add bubbles to the situation, that acidity, it just like really plays off whatever you're going to be eating. And finally, Gramercy Cellars makes a rosé of Mourvedre, which I have been obsessed with that grape varietal lately. I think it's just really beautiful and elegant. And I know I shouldn't like use those words to describe a wine. Like it'd be more helpful if I gave you like specific flavors, but just give it a try and let me know what you think. I think it'll be worth trying. So that's from Gramercy Cellars here in Washington. Okay, so one of the wines on your table, a rosé made from a GSM blend or one of the grapes in the GSM blend, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. You know, I say those both interchangeably. Sorry if it's confusing. Do you ever feel like you're stuck in a rut, doing the same old thing day in and day out? You wake up, go to work, come home, go to bed, and repeat. When life gets busy, it can be easy to fall into that routine and forget how important it is to prioritize joy and fun. But what if I told you there was a way to break out of that cycle? A way to bring more excitement and adventure into your life. And it involves one of the most wonderful things in the world, wine. Introducing my Cork Crew Virtual Tasting Club. This is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. Each month, we'll select 2 styles of wine to focus on. We'll taste them together virtually, all while learning more about the regions that the wines are from and the grapes that make the wine. You'll also have the opportunity to meet winemakers, sommeliers, and other wine professionals through our monthly community events. But it's not just about the wine. It's about breaking out of your routine, trying new things, and having a little fun. Imagine being able to impress your friends at your next dinner party with your newfound wine knowledge. Feeling confident when you walk into a wine shop, knowing exactly what to look for and what you'll enjoy. Imagine adding a little bit of excitement to your everyday life. So why not do something for you? Come join the Cork Crew Virtual Tasting Club and start exploring the endless sea of discovery and joy that is the world of wine. Sign up at my website, corkandfizz.com/thecorkcrew, and don't forget to use code WINE101 to get your first month free. And now, back to the show. Okay, next wine. This is the ultimate to me. This is the ultimate Thanksgiving wine, and that is Cabernet Franc. Now, if you're an avid listener of this podcast, you'll know that we've already done a deep dive on Cabernet Franc. I swear I'm not obsessed, but it is such a wonderful wine. Head back to episode 14 if you want to listen to that deep dive. The thing is, Cabernet Franc to me just smells like Thanksgiving. It has this really bright red fruit, you know, it makes me think of cranberry sauce. And then it has this like herbal, earthy note with the mushrooms. And I know it's not traditional, but I love mushrooms and stuffing. I just think it works so well. And then it has all these green elements to it, thyme and rosemary. And, you know, it works really well with like that vegetal side of Thanksgiving with your green bean casserole and all the herbs you stuff the turkey with. Now, the cool thing about Cabernet Franc is that it can be totally different based on where you get it from. So if it is the grapes were grown in a warmer climate, say like California, Washington, Australia, kind of like southern France, it's going to be more fruit forward, it's going to be bigger, it's going to be bolder. Now, if you get it from a cooler climate, like say the Loire Valley in France, or maybe Finger Lakes in New York, it's going to be more medium-bodied, more mineral-driven, and a lot of herbaceous notes to it. So this way you can kind of choose, you know, it's like choose your own adventure based off like, you know, who's going to be there, what is their typical style. You can find a Cabernet Franc, or you can do one of each. So everybody has an option. Different areas that you can find Cabernet Franc from, or where to keep an eye out when you're shopping for this wine. Like I said, France is a big producer of Cabernet Franc, and specifically in the Loire Valley. Now, just to make it more difficult for us, unfortunately, they typically don't label the wine Cabernet Franc. Instead, they label it by the sub-region within the Loire Valley. So what you're going to want to look for is Chinon for guy, which looks more like Bourgueil when you're looking at it, Bourgueil, St. Nicholas de Bourgogne, and Samour Champigny. One of my favorite things to do when you're at the wine shop, or if you're at a wine shop, ask for help. Just tell them you want a Cabernet Franc from the Loire Valley. They will lead you to where you need to go. If you're in a bigger shop like, say, Total Wine, or you're shopping in your, local supermarket and you don't have somebody there to help you, use an app like Vivino where you can take a picture of the bottle and it will find it, and then you can look up. Usually there's a section in Vivino where it tells you what grapes it's made out of. That is super helpful. You can also find Cabernet Franc in Bordeaux, France, though it's used mostly for blending, meaning that most of the red wine that comes out of Bordeaux is usually primarily Cabernet Sauvignon or primarily Merlot, and then they might blend small percentages of Cabernet Franc in. However, there are some producers that make 100% Cabernet Franc or wines that are like 50% or more Cabernet Franc. Some to look out for would be Chateau Cheval Blanc, Les Domaines, and Chateau Lafleur. Do you think my French is getting better? I sure hope so. All right, moving out of France to areas that I can pronounce. The US also produces a lot of Cabernet Franc. Some of my favorite regions for this would be the Finger Lakes in New York, Virginia. Do not count out Virginia. They make amazing Cabernet Franc. And then Washington State as well. I've had some really great ones from around here, though I know if you're outside of Washington, it's a little harder. And lastly, I feel like I have not given this region enough attention, though it is hard to get some wine out of there. But I know we got some listeners here. Canada. So Ontario's Niagara Peninsula, Prince Edward County, the North Shore of Lake Erie, Pelee Island, and the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia all produce great Cabernet Franc. Now, as always, I'm happy to give you specific bottle recommendations, though I know these could be harder to find. So don't be afraid to kind of explore and reach out at your, local wine shop to find a bottle. But some of my favorites, I really enjoy the Keswick Vineyards 100% Cabernet Franc from Virginia. It's full-bodied with spicy and earthy tones. Just, again, I love that for Thanksgiving. I also enjoy the Early Mountain Madison County Cabernet Franc. Something really cool is that they sometimes blend in small percentages of other grapes that are very common in Virginia. So they've used a little bit of a grape called Petit Manseng. It helps refine and punctuate those aromatics that the Cabernet Franc produces. They also will use Petit Verdot sometimes to bring in some color and some structure. Another great producer to look out for is a French one. His name is Arnaud Lambert. He also produces a great Chenin Blanc, which, spoiler, I may mention this wine later as a good one for Thanksgiving. But he produces Cabernet Franc in the Loire Valley, and many of his wines are actually natural wines. So if you listen to that episode I did with Molly Ring a little bit ago, and you're interested in exploring more natural wines, these are some great options. So look for, they're labeled, one of them is Arnaud Lambert Braise Clos Mazaric Samour Rouge. So look for that rouge term. That means red in French. So it's going to be the red wine from the region, which will be Cabernet Franc. The other one is Arnaud Lambert Samour Champigny Terres Rouge. Hopefully I did that close. I can add these in the show notes as well for you to look for. Okay, Cabernet Franc, that's your top red wine that I'm going to recommend, but stick around to the end. I will also give you a few more just because I can't hold back. Okay, a white wine that you need to have on your table for Thanksgiving this year is a Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. This blend of these two grapes, Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc, is famous. It was made famous in Bordeaux. But what's crazy is I actually first fell in love with it in Washington State. This is the blend that DeLisle Cellars does, and they were the winery. It's a long story, but they were essentially the winery that my husband and I got married at. And so the Chiller Blanc is the white wine that we served, and it just means a lot to me, but it also just tastes really, really good. This blend works so well because it has this vibrant acidity and these really nice herbal floral aromas from the Sauvignon Blanc, but then it gets this structure and mouthfeel from Semillon. It gives it this texture and this richness. Now, the thing is, these wines can be oaked or unoaked, so keep an eye on that. I think either one would pair well with Thanksgiving, but it kind of just depends what your preference is. If you prefer higher acidity, kind of sleek, fresh, delicate, go for the unoaked. If you want it to be a little bit richer, you'd like that a little bit more mouth coating kind of feeling, go for the oaked. I think this is a great wine as well because it has a lot of notes, from the crowd pleaser and familiar wine, Sauvignon Blanc, but it has a little something new and a little bit of that richness that makes me think of fall in the Semillon. So it's kind of like if you have some people in your family or that are coming over for Thanksgiving that are kind of just like they have their favorites already in wine, but you want to introduce them to something new, doing one of these blends is a great option for that. In terms of flavors that you can expect in this blend, we've got everything from lemon curd, grass, baking spices, star fruit, guava, fresh flowers, and even this like marzipan almond kind of flavor. I think that's something I often get with Semillon, which is so interesting. As I mentioned before, you can find this blend as a Bordeaux Blanc. So any white wines from Bordeaux will often be a blend of these two grapes plus a third, but generally in smaller percentages. And specifically the region of Graves is where you will find this Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. You can also find it in the Margaret River in Australia. And then, of course, as I mentioned, Washington State and South Africa is working on making a few of these. I've had some really delicious bottles before. In terms of favorite bottles, I've already mentioned the first one, Dulot Cellars Chaleur Blanc. I will always have one of these bottles somewhere in my cellar just because I love drinking it and serving it to people. And so I always want to make sure I have it in stock. A great one from the Margaret River is Franklin Tate. The Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend from them is wonderful. And then, of course, from Bordeaux, you have tons of options. But if you shop at Total Wine, there's one called Chateau Haut Guilbault. It looks like Gillibot. That's what I usually try to say it like phonetically, so it makes more sense when you're looking for it. But Chateau Haut Guilbault, and this is a white Bordeaux. It's an absolute steal at Total Wine. It's usually under $15. It's a great, great option. Okay, we have made it. We've enjoyed we did our toast with the Cremant. We had a wonderful meal with our GSM Rosé, our Cabernet Franc, and our Semillon Sauvignon Blanc blend. And now it's time for pumpkin pie. And we need a wine to pair with our pumpkin pie, of course. So I am going to recommend a tawny port. First of all, port is a fortified wine from, you'll never guess, Portugal. Fortified basically means that the fermentation process, remember when I talked about that earlier with the sparkling wine? So yeast plus sugar equals alcohol and carbon dioxide. This fermentation process is actually stopped before it can finish all the way, before all the sugar can be eaten. It's stopped by adding a neutral grape spirit. So it leaves that residual sugar, so the sugar that hasn't been eaten by the yeast yet. But because we added a spirit, it boosts that alcohol content up. The other cool thing is port is made with a unique blend of Portuguese indigenous grapes. There are said to be at least 52 different varieties that are allowed in a port wine. It's very, very cool. So there are two main types, and keep an eye out. It does matter which one you get. So there's a ruby port and a tawny port. I'm recommending that latter one, the tawny port. This is going to be a sweeter version of port. It's going to be barrel aged. It's going to have that oxidative kind of nutty and caramel flavors, which I think will work really well with our pumpkin pie. As I mentioned before, that tawny, it basically means that the wine itself is, first of all, it's a blend of multiple vintages, meaning that the grapes didn't come from one single harvest year. They're a combination of multiple years. And so those are all aged in barrel for at least 3 years. And what this does is it gradually exposes them to oxidation and evaporation. That's how you get that oxidation and those kind of nutty notes. It's required for 3 years, but they usually do it for 10 to 40 years. Then they bottle it. Once it's bottled, it's meant to be drunk soon after bottling. Now, one question that I had for the longest time is I'm like, okay, so if the port itself is made from multiple different vintages, right? And you generally don't see a vintage year on the port, but it will say like 10-year tawny port or 20-year tawny port. Like, what does that mean then if it wasn't from a particular year? That year, the 10 or the 20 is essentially the average year. And it can also be a blend of several previous batches of 10-year tawny port, which is kind of wild, blows my mind. I guess that means it's even older. But yeah, so hopefully that kind of answers that question because that was something I was curious about. In terms of flavors, you get this really nice dried orange, some fig, toffee, spices, like I mentioned, a nice little nuttiness. Think like hazelnut is one that comes up a lot for me. And again, I think it's going to pair beautifully with your pumpkin pie. Fair warning, this wine tastes delicious. It is utterly sweet, but be careful. It is also very high alcohol. A typical wine, even your like higher alcohol red wines, will only be about 15% alcohol. A port is usually 19 to 20%. So you will feel it the next morning if you have more than like a glass. And even then, I typically pour these like port glasses, are those like tiny little glasses that you see. You don't have to have one of those to serve this, but just keep that in mind when you're pouring it. Pour yourself like 1 to 2 ounces to start. You don't need to go overboard. Another thing, you may notice that these do cost a little bit more than your typical bottle of wine, but again, that's because it's supposed to last. These wines, you only pour yourself an ounce or two each time you drink it. And the cool thing is, as long as you keep it closed and in a cool place, the higher alcohol level and the sugar will help it last longer. So it'll last at least a month if you close it and then store it in a cool place. Some of my favorite bottles of port include Graham's 10-year-old Tawny Port, Taylor Fladgate 20-year-old, and Nyport 20-year-old. Now, as I mentioned, I cannot just give you 5 wines, but I also can't let this podcast go on forever and tell you about a million wines. So just listen up. Here are a couple other wines that I would recommend to have for Thanksgiving. So in terms of white wines, Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay, Viognier, looks like Viognier when you spell it out, and Roussanne. In terms of red, Gamay works beautifully as well. It's kind of that lighter bodied like the Cabernet Franc. You can look specifically in a French region called Beaujolais. Really, really wonderful. Pinot Noir is another one. And so Etna Rosso. I feel like this is one that's harder to find, but worth it if you can. It's an Italian wine made on volcanic soil. It's just, I had it in my court crew for one of our previous tastings, and it is one of the only wines that everybody who tasted it really loved it. And, that's hard to find. All right, those are my recommendations for your Thanksgiving dinner table. Give them a try. Be sure, take some pictures if you do. Tag me on Instagram at Cork and Fizz. I'd love to see what wines you choose for Thanksgiving. Now, if you love this episode as much as I did, I would so appreciate it if you could take a quick second to rate it and leave a review. You can also share it with more people. You can simply, on the app, open it up and take a screenshot and share that photo on your Instagram stories. Tag me at Cork and Fizz, and that just lets more people know to come check it out. In next week's episode, I'll be interviewing Desiree Harrison Brown. She is the creator of Wino Noir, a lifestyle brand and community that aims to make wine accessible to a diverse population. She's also the founder of The Wino Shop, an online retailer of wine accessories and apparel for the modern wine lover. If you've ever seen anybody wearing the future of wine is female or the future of wine is black shirt, it likely came from Desiree. All right, thanks again for listening. And as a thank you, I'd like to share my free shopping guide, 15 wines under $15. Simply head to my website, corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and join the mailing list. Cheers!